Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this EPRID webinar, and the title being How Valuable is the EU's External FoRB Activities? I just want a few introductory remarks from myself. My name is Alessandro Arie. I am one of the EPRID board members and also the Europe Liaison Officer for CSW, together with Elizabeta as well here, who's the executive secretary for human rights for the Conference of European Churches. Unfortunately, Arie, who was also meant to be with us today, he is carrying out his electoral duties in the Netherlands. So whilst it's unfortunate he's not able to be with us today, we wish him all the best with his work. So today we want to introduce our guest, Raphael Warolin. Raphael has been a policy officer in the Human Rights Division at the EEAS since 2018. He's in charge of freedom of religion or belief, and he also works on human rights defenders protection and digital and human rights. He previously worked for the human rights organization Peace Brigade International in Mexico between 2015 and 2017, and with Amnesty International European institution offices in between 2013 and 2014. Raphael holds a degree in political sciences from Sciences Po Lille in France and a master's in European studies from the Université de Bruxelles. Just to give a bit of context to our participants, last month, some of you will have been aware of the EEAS's roundtable on FoRB, where we discussed, where the EEAS discussed alongside civil society what the EEAS was doing in terms of FoRB in its external action. And the BOC got together, and we thought it would be quite good to have a bit more of an understanding, a bit more of a deep dive into the results of these discussions at the delegation level, but also here at the headquarters. And also to provide an opportunity for civil society to understand how best we can support the EEAS in their work. So without further ado, I just want to hand over to Elizabeta so we can begin the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandro. Welcome, Raphael. It is a pleasure to have you here today with us in this conversation. So without further ado, let's start with the questions. So our first question for today is, what is the impact of the European External Action Service human rights dialogues in the area of the freedom of religion or belief? And have the dialogue brought any tangible results in the third countries?
Yes. Hi, good afternoon to everybody. If you can just confirm that it works. Yes, perfect. Good afternoon. Thanks a lot to Elizabeth and to Alessandro and to Arie, to EPRID for the invitation. It's great to be able to speak to many of your members on freedom of religion or belief. I will answer the question, but I would, if you allow me a few minutes just to give maybe an update on our general human rights policies, because I think, of course, we'll discuss FoRB in details, but it's good to have also a few elements on the general pictures. A few of the elements I will mention now, we can come back later on the Q&A, and I will of course be detailing them a little bit after. And actually it's good for us, it's crucial to maintain regular engagement with CSOs working on FoRB of faith-based actors. I think last month we already organized a roundtable with the EUSR for human rights, Simon Gilmore, where I see that many of you were already present in the call. So it's very important for us to keep these live interactions and regular exchange of information. If we talk human rights in general, of course, it has been a very busy front over the last 12 months or even the last 6 months with the major initiative that I can flag, and I'm happy to share the details later with you via written form, is the new action plan on human rights and democracy that was approved by EU27 last December. With a series of priorities, and actually the FoRB component is quite prominent, where we highlight, so this action plan will guide our action for the upcoming four years. And the commitment to FoRB is reinforced, of course. It's clearly highlighted. And also connects, similar, not only promotion, combating discrimination and intolerance on religious or belief grounds, but also the need to promote interfaith dialogue as a positive tool for conflict mediation. So the action plan really, emphasize our traditional priorities for gender equality, combating death penalty, torture eradication, and so on, LGBTI rights, but it also looks at new angles that we need to target and that are also linked actually to FoRB as well, as of course all human rights are interdependent, but it's the new emerging threats and opportunities of digital on human rights, and then the leak of challenges and environment. Then another major initiative was the sanction regimes, the global human rights, EU human rights sanctions regime approved on last December, where listing will be proposed in the upcoming month by the HRVP and by member states. And many of you might have seen in the press that some sanctions were under discussions and approved over the last weeks on Russia. And then, of course, a major impact for our work, it was, of course, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that has hindered many human rights, including FoRB. So we have seen in many countries taking measures to limit human rights in practice, including FoRB. So for instance, we understand that for many countries, it was possible to limit manifestations of freedom of religion or belief over the 12 months. I think it has been the case, of course, as well in EU member states, but we passed a strong message that this should be anchored in the principles that we know, non-discrimination, limited in time, and so on. So that's clearly a message that we passed. And we also saw the spread of fake news, disinformation, and scapegoating of certain religious communities, accusing them of kind of spreading COVID-19, non-respecting measures being part of the guilty ones. And we have seen that across the world. I will not necessarily quote countries, but that's also, we have tried to call, UN member states or third countries with who we have a dialogue to try to protect all communities and all individuals that are discriminated and persecuted also during the COVID-19 pandemic. We can come back to a few of these things, but not on the effectiveness, a little bit on our FoRB policies and in particular the dialogues. So what have been our tools over the last year? And I think it's quite important that to remind the context that of course we had a traditional set of tools, dialogues, action in multilateral fora, emergency grants for human rights defenders, including FoRB defenders. And when the COVID-19 pandemic hit, it was a little bit hard at the beginning to mobilize. I think we all had to adapt to working remotely. For instance, all our human rights dialogue, where we raise FoRB and all other human rights issues, have transitioned to digital means. Of course, as you can imagine, it is true that having a human rights dialogue on very sensitive issues with a third country is a little bit more delicate because you don't have the side discussions where you can be a little bit more vocal sometimes. And also the dialogues were shorter than before due to the time difference, but we still raise prominently FoRB issues, in particular with MENA countries, countries in the MENA region, and also in Central Asia, South Asia, Southeast Asia, in particular, and also the Eastern Partnership country. As you know, FoRB is not a prominent issue for us in Latin America, even if it could, but we have maybe other main priorities on these countries. And then we have also less human rights dialogue with sub-Saharan countries. Of course, it doesn't mean that if we don't have a dialogue, we don't engage actively with that country. I can think, for instance, of Mauritania or Sudan on FoRB issues. We can do it through demarches, etc. And we also keep delivering grants on to support human rights defenders at risk. What's the evaluation? I mean, first of all, I think as a general remark, it's quite hard to say when it is only the EU action that was key, because usually all the cases that we work on and you share many cases with us. I mean, I see some of you in the participants, I mean, that you are in regular contact with us, whether it's raising the case of Baha'is in Yemen and Iran, of humanists in Mauritania or Pakistan, of Christians in many countries of the Middle East. Sometimes when we manage to secure an individual being released, for instance, it is hard to know if it's only the EU or it's because also the US have pressed, the UN Special Rapporteur, civil society. You are one of the key elements, of course, and faith-based actors, a key element of outrage. So I will not say that when we get results, it's necessarily only us. That's quite of hard to track, except when we use a little bit trait preferences, but that's maybe something that we can come back a bit later in the conversation. And then I guess many of the things that we manage to for instance, when we have a Christian Jehovah Witness in Russia that's in detention, we raise quite extensively the cases in multilateral fora. It's quite hard sometimes to besides securing the release, sometimes the only fact that we are raising constantly his or her case drives, the impact is that this individual is not further tortured, but it's a bit of hard to prove that we had an impact when it's a non-action. I don't know if I'm clear enough, but it's true that we still have to improve monitoring. In general, I will say that it's true that perhaps we achieve more results in less confrontational issue, for instance, the death penalty, where there is a global trend on abolitionism, or also, for instance, sometimes gender equality, when we see many countries of violence against women adopting laws to curtail violence against women. On the FoRB side, I will say that on legislation, we don't have so many countries reforming their legislation on FoRB, discriminating population. I think our bigger success of dialogues and other instruments have been individual cases. We have a few cases in mind. Asia Bibi in Pakistan a few years ago, Pastor Bronson in Turkey. We had recently many cases of humanists in Mauritania or right now in Pakistan. And I think we have managed to secure, with outcry and pressure, releases of these individuals, or the fact that these individuals were brought by their own home country under protection measures or in safe places, or sometimes the impact was safe relocation of these individuals, which is not a good result per se, because it means they had to flee, but still they are in safety. So I will say on individual cases, we had success. On legislation, not so much, except maybe countries that are transitioning. We can think, for instance, right now of Uzbekistan, that is transitioning towards, in general, more human rights compliance. Sorry, I'm taking a long time. I will be shorter in the other questions, but I think it was important to send the scene. Uzbekistan, where there is a huge agenda of reform, and we are constantly raising, together with the UN Special Rapporteur, calling the country to bring their laws in line with international human rights standards. So there are a few, we think we have an impact, not only us, but we contribute to the improvement of the situation. Tunisia a few years ago, when there were improvement on the legislation. And then also, I think we have constantly, we have been doing new dialogues with countries in the Gulf, for instance, where I think we have managed to visibilize the countries, the situation of certain minorities in certain countries, where we see now that there are a little bit violence and discriminations towards them. Again, hard to know if it's only the EU action per se. Two more things on our impact. Then that's the issue, and I think we can discuss further with participants, then of wider persecution. We can have situations in mind, Christians in the Middle East, Uyghurs in Xinjiang comes to mind, for instance. As you can imagine, it's quite to get. With other countries, we still have frozen human rights dialogue, so it's even hard to push our messages. I see that my connection is a bit unstable. I hope it works. So on wider persecution issues, for instance, maybe on Uyghurs, it's hard to get results. On Christians on the Middle East, like let's take Syria and Iraq, and it's true that 2 days ago it was the 10 years of the start of the conflict. I know that some impact has probably been achieved, not only on FoRB per se, but on human rights protection and let's say humanitarian relief, by trying to provide safe corridor to certain minorities, to provide relief funds, and so on. And just let me finish. I think a lot of things we provide, as you know, in many countries, humanitarian relief. We are doing programs for security sector reform, to have security forces and stronger change of justice and stronger rule of law in many countries around the world. And we think it contributes to FoRB, but not only to human rights in general. But it's a little bit hard to quantify. And sorry, last thing on the dialogue, just to mention that as a new result, because it is true that our dialogue, sometimes we raise FoRB and then we wait to the next year. So as part of having a little action plan after the dialogues, we are trying to implement specific FoRB seminars. So for instance, we have one next week with Indonesia. We'll have one soon with Bahrain, where we'll discuss with the line ministries responsible of justice, tolerance, and non-discrimination, and EU member states and UN experts to really exchange information on what works in Europe, what doesn't, and what works in their country and what doesn't, to really exchange good practices. So we think we'll move, thanks to digital means, that's the good thing of COVID, maybe the only one, we can connect really quickly our experts in Brussels with experts in third countries. And we really want to push for these initiatives and to have concrete and specific advice on key issues such as blasphemy laws, such as non-discrimination of certain groups, etc. So we hope to have more impact with this new initiative.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you, Raphael. Can I just make a note just on the side here? If anyone wants to ask any questions, there'll be a time for Q&A at the end of this conversation. So please feel free to write them in the meantime, and then we can read them out, and Raphael will be able to answer. Yeah, Raphael, thank you so much for that, and also especially with the new initiatives that are coming up with Indonesia and Bahrain. You were speaking about how it was difficult to quantify and actually understand how much the EU was actually responsible for certain actions. Let me try and draw that out a bit more by asking you the following question. Since the EU guidelines on FoRB were adopted in 2013, has the European External Action Service and its delegations seen any notable changes with regards to its work on FoRB in these last 8 years?
Well, thanks a lot. I will narrow down. And by the way, just coming back, linked to that question, when we talk about evaluation and if we have seen notable changes, of course, you are giving me the voice, but then you are one of the primary stakeholders responsible for monitoring our action. I know we have regular feedback, and you often identify gaps, of course, or country situations where we could act further. So it's not only for us to say, but of course, for you. A few things on the guidelines. So as many of you, I know that many of you of the participants were also involved in drafting the guidelines. It has been, of course, a while already. From what we heard, we regularly exchange with civil society and faith-based actors. I think the common agreement or the common analysis is that the guidelines, the text per se is good, that the main issues regarding FoRB are really mentioned or targeted by the guidelines: discrimination, tolerance, blasphemy, many other issues. But of course, you often raise the issue of implementation. So first of all, and it's not as an excuse, but just to recall also the means of the EEAS, where we have delegations leading many groundbreaking work on human rights, but then often we are talking about one or two persons in the field that deal with political matters, that not only deal with FoRB, but with all human rights, and then with other political matters. So it is true that we can't perhaps implement as good systematically and as good as civil society would like to guidelines, but we just have to see that. Our analysis and my analysis, and as you mentioned in the introduction, I joined the EEAS 3 years ago, so I didn't see the switch between 2013 and now. But even if I know my colleague Merete was just before in the participants, and she has seen it better. The general analysis in the EEAS is that we have seen a major internal shift. It means that before 2013, when we were discussing human rights in our dialogues, or even when we had any emergency situations, our colleagues were really keen on discussing freedom of expression, safety of journalists, human rights defenders protection, gender equality, and so on. But it's true that FoRB was not always even perceived as being human rights for some delegation. It was it's religious, it's cultural, it's political, it's not really a human rights issue. So I think since the guideline, now there is almost, of course, a systematical awareness that freedom of religion or belief is clearly one of the essential human rights as enshrined in international human rights law, and what the EEAS has to defend and promote, which is the right to have, not to have, to change of religion or belief, the right to manifest, the right, of course, also important, you can criticize religion, it doesn't protect religion, it protects individuals. So all these key concepts were clarified. We have seen a huge awareness of colleagues, and now we think, especially in countries such as, of course, in Asia, in MENA and Sub-Saharan Africa, colleagues systematically acknowledging that they have to protect and promote FoRB, but of course, sometimes asking questions, because we have also a huge turnover of staff. As you know, sometimes we had colleagues working on climate change in Argentina that starts then to work on FoRB in Pakistan. So we have to train them regularly, and I will come to train. But it's also why we are there at HQ, is always to have their advice. And I remember actually my first day in the office, exactly 3 years and a few days ago, my first day was questions on Iceland on the question of circumcision and the link between rights of the child and FoRB. So we constantly advise delegations almost on a daily basis on FoRB issues. We have done trainings. And of course, I will say, due to turnover, sometimes we have to remind clearly to colleagues that FoRB is a priority. That's why in the action plan, it is. In the upcoming human rights country strategies, I will come maybe to that a bit later. It is an important aspect. It is an important aspect, and that's why we do regular trainings. Every year we have a human rights training weeks where we try to raise FoRB every time, but sometimes we have to make arbitrage and choose other priorities. My colleague Merete has been every year organizing trainings for all EEAS staff that are willing to on religion and foreign policy, and including FoRB modules. Then we have also in our internal intranet, we have specific modules drafted by NorFoRB on what is FoRB and how we should promote and protect it, which is available on a rolling basis. And of course, I just wanted to say that maybe the caveat is that these trainings are not mandatory. So except Human Rights Week, where we try to have one mandatory human rights training for all political sections every year, they are not mandatory. So of course, persons that have most interest in these issues might be more interested.
Thank you, Raphael, for this very good explanation, relating to the guidelines, because many of us have been participating in the drafting, process with our comments and the issues that we were thinking it would be important to find their place in the guidelines. And it is, I think, a very big victory, actually, that these guidelines exist in the form that we have them, because they come in 2013 and the European Union exists for many decades. So still, of course, there is way to go, but it's good that we have a good document, to work with. As for the next question that we have relates to the economic and trade agreements with the third countries. And are there examples by the European External Action Service where freedom of religion or belief violations have had a noticeable impact on the economic and trade agreements between EU and third country? If so, which countries? And from your experience, if you can a little bit explain, is this hard for EEAS to do?
Good question and a hard one. That's why I will first start to add an element on the second one, actually, because it just came back to my mind. But I'm not hiding away from the country and trade agreement, which is important, just because you say that the guidelines are important, and I was saying that colleagues in delegations are more aware, and it has been, now you can see, I think you can see more grants delivered to human rights defenders who work on FoRB, also more démarches. So now we have way more démarches regularly driven by your EU delegations, and also you can argue about that perhaps more statements. As I mentioned, we had statements recently on Jehovah's Witnesses in the Russian Federation. We had back in the days on blasphemy in Indonesia. We had on Asia Bibi's case. So we are seeing more statement. And just I wanted to add something which is important, is not just that delegations are are consulting us, but they are reporting us more. So every year, all delegations, I'm not sure if you're all aware, They have to report on their human rights policy. It's a quite long document, but they report on their human rights country strategy implementation, and they report on FoRB. So they really clearly say what have been the actions if FoRB was a priority. Okay, if in a country it was less of a priority, they might not report. Then on trade agreements, very important questions. As you know, we have several tools to try to link or to have stronger human rights leverage thanks to trade preferences, in particular through a few mechanisms. So the GSP Plus framework, which we have, I think, 10 countries which are beneficiaries, and a current one applying, Uzbekistan, which is under review by the parliament. Then we have, also, of course, also EBA, everything but arms. I mean, some of you might know that last year the Commission is envisaged to withdraw the preferences to Cambodia, and also there were discussions even before the crisis on Myanmar. So we have these tools. We also have human rights clauses in general human rights agreement, where there is always the possibility to suspend a trade agreement where there are like several severe violations of human rights. It hasn't happened so much. However, the specific trade preferences have been withdrawn in a series of occasions over past years. I mentioned Cambodia. I can mention Sri Lanka. It was a little bit it was in the framework of the inception of the civil war, and also Belarus in the past. So is FoRB important? I mean, of course, and I will speak more of GSP Plus that I know. We have many countries that are beneficiaries, Pakistan, Kyrgyzstan, and so on. And we have regular reviews of the agreement every year and a half. We have a monitoring review where we carefully check the UN treaty bodies implementation concluding remarks, and when we observe and we exchange a lot with the UN if there are major violations of human rights, including FoRB. I want to insist, this is not only FoRB, this is all human rights situation. And when we see that there are severe violations, and I can, again, because we got a lot of questions for the parliament, for instance, if we talk about Pakistan, in all the reviews, one of the prominent issues was blasphemy. You can argue whether it was impactful or not, and Asia Bibi case, for instance. So we're raising a lot her case was raised. Then there were other, so we have other countries that are beneficiaries, Kyrgyzstan, Sri Lanka, Bolivia, and so on. So we try to include FoRB as a clear benchmark, but not the only one, other human rights compliance. And then I think when we have more leverage is actually before signing up the agreement. So for instance, I know with Uzbekistan that is under kind of review by the parliament and by member state. First, we needed a green light from the Commission and the EEAS. And when we were engaging regularly with the authorities in Tashkent, FoRB was put on the plate like one of the big issues, not the only one. I mean, there are many other issues, freedom of expression, torture prevention, and so on, LGBTI rights, which is also a job part in the country. We insisted that we want to see FoRB progress, and FoRB progress will be important to have a green light. And as we were seeing some progress, that was one of the elements that was taken into account to advance a little bit. As I said, I think it can work on GSP Plus and EBA. Then it's, of course, for you to see if it's efficient. Perhaps we could be stronger. That's your opinion, or I might have my personal opinion as well. But it's important to have these hard tools in mind. I think there is another important things. Generally, we have also general legislation on torture and human rights that is quite important. First is the Global Alliance on Torture-Free Trade, where the EU, together with Argentina and Mongolia, has spearheaded a coalition of more than now 70 countries, where we are moving towards efficient banning of trade of tools used for torture. And we have secure result on that one, quite tangible. And it's hard to say that it has helped FoRB, but for instance, as we limited the export of many torture, that tools used for torture, we probably have an impact on FoRB with being tortured by these goods. So that's something, and not only on FoRB, but it has an impact on across the human rights board. And now, as you might know, the Commission is actively working on the dual use legislation, which is a legislation to limit the export of surveillance software and tools, electronic digital tools that are used for surveillance. we are actively working on that, so we can definitely impact that. It will have a positive impact on civil society. It's having already, but we are trying to reinforce this legislation on civil society, including civil society working on FoRB. And finally, as I said, I think it's important to move towards harder tools, because it's true that, as we said at the beginning, political dialogues don't always have an impact, let's be frank. That's why also we are trying to move a little bit with the sanctions regime to have a bit more efficient tools. It's not only a dialogue. If you commit human rights violations, you will be sanctioned, you will be held not held accountable, you will have visa bans, you will have assets freeze. So that's why I think it's important to move towards a stronger, harder tools on human rights.
Thank you so much, Raphael. And I think it's also worth mentioning, because I came across this a few weeks ago, is the strategic engagement plan that the EU has with Pakistan. They promote the intercultural, interfaith dialogue. And I think those sort of soft tactics also, they work it seems to be working well. It'd be interesting to see how it develops in years to come. Just the last question I'd like to ask you, Raphael, before we open up for Q&A, is do you envision any increased collaboration of your work linked to COHOM, so the Council Working Party on Human Rights, in the field of freedom of religion or belief?
Thanks for complimenting. I think it was important. I didn't brought member states too much in the picture yet, not even neither the parliament. So that's, I think, actors I should take on. And actually, I will broaden a little bit the question, not only with the COHOM working party in Brussels, but I don't know if all the participants are quite familiar with the COHOM working party, but in general, our work with member states. As I said, Link at the beginning, I think it has been, we regularly work with member states, including at Brussels level, but over this last 12 months, it has been very intense. Of course, because of the action plan, that was a long negotiation between member states. As you can imagine, some member states have different priorities than others on human rights. So it was important to reach a common agreement. And there we regularly exchange, including on FoRB, to really establish what will be the priorities. Then we regularly raise with and discuss with COHOM priorities for the multilateral fora. And I haven't told, by the way, of our work at the UN. I don't know if we will have time, which is very important. And we, for instance, recently negotiated with member states in Brussels the Council conclusions for the UN, for the EU priorities in multilateral fora during the year in the UN fora, sorry. And then we recently had also Council conclusions on COVID-19 and human rights, where we mentioned also the importance of faith-based actors and religion. So that's something that, of FoRB. So we regularly exchange with member states on that. We also, as you know, since August 2019, we have EU statement, HRVP on behalf of the 27th for the International Day Against Religious Persecution, which is on the 21st of August. So this text is negotiated with the EU, with the 27th, so we'll do the same this coming August. So that's really work that we are doing at Brussels level. An important thing, I mentioned it briefly, it's the human rights counter strategies. We have the general action plan, but as you can imagine, our delegation across the world might have different priorities, whether you are based in, of course, in China, in South Africa, or in Bolivia, the priorities are quite different. Hence, every delegation is currently working on drafting an EU human rights country strategy for the given countries and analyze priorities. In many of these countries, we can expect FoRB to be one. And these strategies have to be agreed at Brussels and at local level by member states. So there we will work every delegation is actively working with member states and agreeing what are the priorities. And by the way, all delegations are called to do consultations, broad consultation with CSOs, including CSOs working on FoRB and faith-based actors when deemed relevant. So that's clearly that. Then more at COHOM level, just to add that actually every year we debrief member states on our action on FoRB. I will go in 10 days time, or in 10 days time in 2 weeks time, sorry, to COHOM to debrief member states on our action on FoRB. And that's the moment where member states ask us questions. on many things. I will already mention it because it might come as a question, and that might be a little bit the elephant of the room. We get a lot of questions from member states on the special envoy, for instance. But we have at least once a year, we exchange for a few hours on FoRB with member states. So that will be the occasion when they can share their priorities. Just two more things to mention, because I think it's important to have at least 20 minutes of questions. We want to work with, we work with the EU member states really closely in Geneva and New York. Recently, we had a joint statement. We engaged with the UN Special Rapporteur for his last report on anti-Muslim hatred. So we had a joint statement that was coordinated with member states. A lot of our initiatives in the UN fora are coordinated with member states. So we'll definitely expect that in the coming months. And then what else? I mean, that's a few key things that we'll be working on. And of course, we work closely with the special envoys of many member states. But not only the special envoy, with the Human Rights Division, for instance, most of the member states are present in the International Contact Group on FoRB that meets regularly. We had a meeting last Monday, 10 days ago, where many, like Denmark, the Netherlands, Italy, Sweden, and so on, were very active, and we could really work together on sharing information together with Canada and the US. So we have a really strong engagement, I would say, with EU member states, and more to come, of course.
Thank you very much, Raphael. If I can just add just on that last point, which was because I see there's some people who are engaging from as participants from the offices of special envoys around Europe. And at CSW, we're trying to also promote this post in terms of special envoy in Italy. So we hope to see that come to fruition soon or one day. So that would be very encouraging, especially personally for me. So I'll hand over to Elizabeta again.
Thank you, Raphael, for this update about the all work done in multilateral fora. We are now having some questions in the chat and Q&A. So the first question is relating to the STAN countries that you have mentioned. Do you have connection with a Norwegian NGO called FoRB 18, as they have reports on freedom of religion or belief and abuse, mainly in the Caucasus countries?
Yes, clearly. Thanks, Richard, for the question. I'm clearly in touch with FoRB 18. I was in touch with one of their advocate John, who was UK based. He regularly, of course, contributed to many human rights dialogue. In particular, it's in the Caucasus, but a lot on Central Asia. So we were really trying. The FoRB 18 reports were really good for us to analyze the situation and what should be the recommendations. For instance, of course, as I said, the new law in Uzbekistan, also the new law on FoRB in Kazakhstan, but also situations, Jehovah's Witnesses in some cases in Tajikistan. I remember also cases of, for instance, of course, the situation in Ukraine, but also the right to consensus objections to military service in Turkmenistan. So really detailed reports, and we clearly use them. And actually, in general, on Caucasus, and it's on Caucasus and Central Asia, we work a lot with IPHR, which is a general human rights organization, very good, and they work really closely with FoRB 18. So also they channel a lot of information for FoRB 18 and recommendations to us. So even if sometimes we don't always have systematically, even if we have regular but not systematic with FoRB 18, we try really we have this fresh information coming. So yes, we are definitely in touch with FoRB 18.
Brilliant. Our next question comes from David Muller. David asks, I work for a German foundation as a political advocate for religious freedom in Iraq. Iraq is launching a national dialogue. How is this being supported by the EU?
Good question, David. And actually, so I guess I don't know if you're based in Germany or if you're based in Iraq, actually. But the good thing, and I will definitely use this occasion or maybe after the meeting to connect you, because the current head of the political section in Iraq is one of my predecessors, and he was the officer in charge of coordinating the drafting of the FoRB guidelines. It was my predecessor, I mean, a few predecessors back, Jean-Bernard Bolvin. So he's really familiar with the freedom for general belief. So he will be telling you more. Of course, recently with the Pope visit, I guess that there is a lot to follow up. I mean, it was, of course, quite mediatic all around the world. I don't know if the EU, I mean, the EU will definitely be playing a role on following up a little bit to this visit on some specific issues on interfaith dialogue, reconciliation. As I don't want, as I think you are an expert on Iraq, I will be happy maybe through Alessandro, Elizabeta, to connect you directly to our delegation. As I said, the head of political section has co-drafted the guidelines on FoRB, so it's clearly an issue that they have in mind. And if you allow me, just maybe, because I see that at the moment there are no other questions. Yes, there are others. Just I know that also we are being involved in many countries, in particular around the MENA region on interfaith. I mean, many countries are doing international conferences on interfaith dialogue, or like reconciliation and promotion of tolerance. So we engage happily with them, explaining what we are doing. We also have to be wary when some countries with not very good human rights record are promoting these initiatives, saying a little bit, and it's a caricature, but how good we are on religious tolerance. We have sometimes to come back to their record on human rights, say, well, let's see if we engage actively. I'm not saying that's the case for Iraq, but I was doing maybe a more general remark.
Thank you, Raphael. So we have a last question in the chat from Ruth Watson from EU-ACT Alliance. She would like to know if EEAS is working with ECHO and INFP in FoRB and the role of faith actors in humanitarian and development response, and how. There is a good progress on integration of FoRB concerns in some EU delegations, but we find it is less developed issue at HQ level in ECHO. And what support do you see as necessary from civil society in this regard?
Okay, good question. I mean, I'll try to narrow a little bit. So with ECHO, the humanitarian relief of the Commission, it's true that I work way less than with INPA, or for many of you might not know yet that it's the former DEFCO that it's not recalled INPA, and it's true that the change of name is, many of us are getting used to the change of name. We work, I think, with ECHO not so much on the EEAS. We are not so much involved with them. As I mentioned, we know that for Syria, Iraq, and many other countries, Libya, they are doing they have been driving a lot of humanitarian relief, including for targeted minorities, Yazidis in Iraq. I mean, just to quote a few. But it's true that we are not partnering together with ECHO. I don't know if you have concrete. I don't know to what extent you are in touch with ECHO, and if you have suggestion of how better FoRB could be mainstream in a little bit in our humanitarian relief. As I said, I think the approach was of the EU is really to try to reach to all targeted populations in need. But I don't know if there is a focal point in ECHO working specifically on a little bit having a religious lens to humanitarian relief. With INPA or DEFCO, we work way closer. So of course, because before also the special envoy, actually, the former special envoy was working under DEFCO/INPA, and he had a team, so we're working on a weekly basis. And a few things. I think first, we have done a lot of trainings with EU delegations, making understand to EU delegations, and INPA has led this work, that faith-based actors can be a recipient of development programs, that they can be a key actor, not only on programs to foster religious tolerance, but also on service delivery, on health services, on education services. And I think a lot of training has been done, and subsequently, a lot of support has been channeled towards CSOs working on FoRB or to faith-based organization. And for instance, I don't have any more the figure in mind. Under the previous ADHR, we had, I can find you the figures if you allow me a minute. We had several millions, we had around 10 projects specifically dedicated to religious tolerance, fostering religious tolerance, and it was giving funds to civil society to foster a little bit, for instance, religious, interreligious dialogue and so on. Of course, if you talk to colleagues in INPA separately, they will be able to really give you a good overview of their actions. That is a start. As you know, we are on the new phase of programming, they're called NDICI or NDICI, which is currently being discussed. And it's true that we still have a very subsequent envelope for human rights. Our colleagues are currently working on programming. So if you want to reach out, I guess due to your position, you are in really regular contact with INPA. But there will be clearly space for programs to promote and protect FoRB. There will be, but I'm not yet aware of the details because the envelopes are being organized, and then there will be specific call for proposals and so on. But yeah, so just in a nutshell, I think with ECHO, with INPA, we work quite closely, not so much with ECHO.
Thank you, Raphael. Because of time constraints, we'll have to make this our last question. So apologies for those who aren't able to have a response. I'll ask Penelope's question since it was voted up. So Penelope, she's actually a member of EPRID. She's from the Vietnam Committee on Human Rights. She asks that the Vietnamese authorities impose strict registration systems on religions. So the EU is the only contact with state-recognized religious groups, but it is the independent groups that suffer the most repression. Has the EU any views about dealing with the situation?
Yeah. So can you, does it work now?
Yeah.
Yeah, Penelope, I don't know, your name rings a bell. I think you work specifically with an NGO working on Vietnam. I think I've been receiving some information from your organization. To be honest, I think FoRB and in Southeast Asia, the country where we raise it more prominently together with Indonesia, but with another agenda was Vietnam. We had many individuals in detention for promoting and protecting and promoting FoRB at large. We have some of them, I don't have the names in case we have been monitoring the trials actually, or we have been sometimes, I don't know if visits in detention, but we have been monitoring trials of HRDs working on FoRB in the country. We have been constantly raising it in dialogues. You can question whether it has been impactful or not. I will leave that the judgment to you, but it has been clearly on our radar, and I think the delegation regularly. I know that they regularly meets with human rights defenders working on minorities. But then, if you, I guess that you are arguing by your question that we don't meet enough with independent group, or we probably should more. So. I guess you have connection already with the delegation, but I will be happy also to, we can liaise after the meeting, if you have specific names in mind with who the delegation can meet, and I can make the connection. Of course, as I said, I work from HQ. I work on not only on FoRB, but on many other portfolios. I liaise many with delegations, but I don't know exactly the cases of all delegations. There are some that I work more with, but I know in Vietnam it has been important. We constantly raise it, as I said, with what impact, that's of course another question. But at least we try to provide funds. Many HRDs over the last month have requested funds as well for emergency measures, and we have provided them for individuals working on FoRB. But as I said, we can liaise after that meeting, perhaps if needed.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Raphael. And thank you so much for sitting down with us and just speaking to us a bit more about what the EEAS is doing. And I hope that this has been fruitful for all the participants that have joined in, and as well as for you, Raphael. It surely has been for myself and Elizabeta. So just one or two words just before we finish. At the end of this webinar, you should be receiving just a little note asking for feedback. It should take just about 30 seconds. Feel free to fill that up. But apart from that, yes, thank you so much for joining with us. Elizabeth, if you want to say anything.
Yeah, well, I would like to thank as well to Raphael for being there today with us and answering all these important questions that we were wondering, like how that is going to run, because always these questions about impact are difficult actually to answer. So you didn't have an easy task actually today responding on all these questions, because it is always an issue, like what are the mechanisms, like that one institution has methodologically to assess, like the impact of certain documents and their implementation and so on. So thank you so much for, like your inspiration and good responses, preparing all these answers for our audience. And special thanks also goes to Arie, who is member of the board of coordinators, who was planning this event with us, and as well to Francesco De Lillo, who was helping to Alessandro and myself today with communications issues, like setting up this webinar, as well as to all the EPRID members who have been contributing and developing the concept for this webinar. So I hope in April we are going to have next webinar, and maybe Alessandro, you can already announce this a little bit. What are our plans?
Yes, I think we'll announce it when we have a bit more information, but definitely something for April. We have that in the pipeline. So yeah, Raphael, thank you so much for sitting down with us. It's been really constructive, the dialogue.
Welcome. Thanks for giving me the opportunity. As I think we have regular interaction, but it's good to meet in large groups. As I said, our door is always open to CSOs and to faith-based actors to share cases. So I know that we have maybe Penelope and Michael can then be in touch with me. If you can maybe provide them my email for the questions on Vietnam and Iraq. So thanks a lot for giving me the opportunity. Just to mention, because I just want to take maybe the closing remarks to address in 4 words the remaining questions. To Richard, yes, we are very active also in OSCE, even if the human dimension implementation meeting didn't take place this year, but we are raising we are doing public statements such as on Jehovah's Witnesses in Russia, but we are also doing, we are also working closely with the Venice Commission and with ODIHR, not with the Venice Commission, with ODIHR, calling countries in the region to accept recommendations on FoRB from ODIHR and expert assessment. And finally, I think it was important to address it because it was one of the questions on the special envoy. As you know, it's a long issue that coming back at the moment. The EUSR for human rights, Simon Gilmore, is leading our work on FoRB, on human rights, including on FoRB. As you know, the Vice President of the Commission, Skin, has tweeted about that decision in July, and now the Commission is working on appointing determining the mandate of the identity. I know it has been very long since the decision was taken, but we are all waiting to see what happens. But in any case, the EUSR for human rights is now leading the work on FoRB. Thanks again for the opportunity. I wanted to address the remaining question.
Thank you very much for answering those 2 questions. And we'll see you soon then. Thank you very much. Bye then.
Thanks, Elizabeta. Thanks, Alessandro. And thanks everybody for joining.